They underestimated the human princess until the battlefield fell quiet. Inside the cabin, Alara straightened her posture and smoothed the front of her plain dress. She did not wear jewels or heavy cloth. She had learned long ago that small things could make a bigger impression than grand ones. Her hair was pulled back in a simple knot. Her eyes, dark and steady, watched the spire grow larger through the viewplate. She had imagined how this moment might feel. She had thought of fanfare, of banners, of grand welcomes. Instead, the docking bay was efficient and nearly empty. A pair of attendants in soft gray uniforms guided her along polished corridors. Their speech had the warm timbre of the spire's many languages. They were polite, careful, but not eager. That was as she expected. Humans were not yet part of the inner circles here. The spire belonged to a long league of civilizations that trusted time and procedure. They trusted themselves. Alara stepped into the central chamber and felt the air change. The room was round and tall. Tall enough that her head could not reach the carved line where the ceiling curved toward a silver ring of light. The light was measured and cool. It made the rows of seats look like river steps. All around, the council members sat in quiet confidence. Some had skin that shimmered like mother of pearl. Some had shapes that bent and folded in ways humans did not. Voices rose and fell like distant music. They watched her with the composed interest of visitors who had seen many planets and many rulers. She was introduced to each in turn. She smiled when she should, bowed when it was proper, and answered questions with calm economy. She spoke of trade goods, of ships that could harvest quiet energy from their star, of farmers who grew durable wheat with little water. She spoke of songs and books and the small law of not wasting heat in winter. Nothing about her home dazzled. It was a modest tale. That was on purpose. She wanted them to imagine what they wanted and then to be surprised later. The council's lead negotiator was a being called Rel. Rel's voice moved like wind through reeds. He had been polite but cool since the beginning. He asked for the human proposals in writing. Alara obliged and handed him a slim folio printed on local paper. Rel skimmed the pages with a small, graceful motion. His many eyes blinked in approval at certain lines and then slid away from others. He raised a single question about human governance. Was Earth truly unified? He curled his many fingers together and smiled a little way of amusement. So small a world holds a princess and claims unity, he said. How convenient. It was meant to be a joke. Several in the chamber laughed in the polite, short-way councils laughed at jokes. Alara felt no anger, she only saw a chance. She had learned that the easiest way to change a mind was to lead it gently away from its own assumptions. She replied plainly. We are not perfect, she said. We are newly united, yes, we have errors, but we learn fast. And when we learn, we change faster than we appear. Rel's gaze lingered, as if trying to see parts of her story the paper could not hold. For a moment, she thought he might ask for proof. Instead, he moved the conversation to trade tariffs and orbital rights. The council was old in procedure and guarded in change. It asked the same questions of every new species. It sought to measure with the same yardstick. It had tools and tests for those whose place it could not yet decide. After the formalities, Alara was shown the galleries. There were workshops and research halls, machines that looked like living things, and quiet rooms where languages hummed like bees trapped in jars. She was guided by a young researcher named Miko. Miko had eyes that shifted color when she laughed. He spoke with a gentle curiosity and asked Alara about the simplest things. How do your farmers handle drought? He asked. What do you feed your children in the winter? Alara answered with stories of small kiosks of solar glass that lined streets in her city, of neighborhood collectives that shared water, of kitchens that turned peelings into broth. She talked of an old woman in her district who pressed herbs into cloth to soothe coughs. Miko listened as if every detail were a small gem. When they stopped before a wide workbench covered in coils and humming cores, Alara's fingers hovered over a pattern of etched lines in the bench's surface. The pattern reminded her of the river networks near her home. It was the way water divided and joined, a map of both flow and pause. She traced the lines with a fingertip. Miko watched her and then bent to show her a device. This is an adaptive grid, he said. It shifts energy through a city as demand changes. It predicts use by learning the habits of the population. He smiled with the soft pride of an inventor. We built it to prevent overloads. Alara looked at the grid and at the tiny display that showed energy pulses like little suns. She noticed a small ripple in the pattern. The grid seemed to favor certain nodes over others. When she asked why, Miko explained datasets and priority flags and long histories of where energy had been needed before. The system learned from the past and used that to make choices for the present. Alara nodded. She could see the logic. She also saw an angle that no one else in the hall did. "Does it ever misread a change?" she asked. Miko blinked. "Sometimes, but the errors are rare. It corrects itself." "But what if the error is at the edge of its learning?" she pressed. "What if a new pattern arises that looks small at first but changes every link that follows?" Miko thought of this. He was not a strategist. His entire world had been calculus and metal and careful calibration. He appreciated small truths but did not always see how they fit into larger living systems. "Then the grid will adapt," he said. "It will learn." Alara smiled. She had no wish to prove him wrong. She only wanted to leave a seed. "Learning is a lagging thing," she said. "It trails the world a step behind. If the world changes faster than the learning, the system looks like wisdom when it is only memory." Miko considered this, and then they moved on. Alara's eyes took in more than the instruments. She watched technicians move between tasks with a rhythm like waves. She observed how the council's servants stored their speech like lists, and how their eyes moved to check the same data points in the same order. There was grace, of course, in a mind that was trained for perfection. There was also a gentle kind of blindness. They had built machines to answer the questions they asked. If a new question appeared, the machines might pause and wait for instruction. She visited an archive where star maps were woven into long cloths. She was shown a library of ecological models that predicted how planets might warm or cool. She looked at charts that had been trusted for generations. Her hand rested on a model that showed how a certain kind of ocean current could reverse under rare conditions. The model's prediction line had thin error bars. It read like a small voice of warning. Many around her read the line and filed it as an unlikely event. Alara read the line and felt it like a clock sliding toward a hidden hour. What gave her the most authority in the human world was less of a device or a treaty and more of a practice. Humans had to improvise in ways that were not elegant but were effective. They had to make choices with the tools they had and the faults they found along the way. They could not wait for perfect data. They spoke, and then they acted, and then they listened to how the world changed because of what they had done. That cycle of action and listening made them fast. That evening, in small rooms where the council members dined with quiet ritual, Alara was offered more questions than answers. She met diplomats who asked about her youth, scholars who wanted to discuss philosophy, and a woman who led planetary modeling who spoke with blunt curiosity. They knew the facts of Earth in careful measures. They knew the scale, the maps, the treaties. What they did not know was the old rhythm of changing and adapting. They asked if humans feared the unknown. Alara answered softly, "We fear it sometimes, but mostly we meet it." One of the counselors, a being with skin like folded glass, tapped a slender finger and said, "You claim your people can change fast. Then you will understand our test." A murmur moved through the room like wind in dry reeds. Tests here were formal things. They were not traps for cruelty. They were structured trials to see whether a visitor could lead by council law. The test this council favored was a simulation called the field. It was an artificial system that created a problem and measured responses. It could be set to many tones: diplomatic, logistical, environmental. It was a way to see leadership not on paper, but in the quiet of making choices. Alara listened without surprise. She had read of the field in diplomatic briefings. She had expected it. She had not expected the slight smirk on the face of Rel. He glanced at her with that cool wind of amusement and said, "The field is balanced for those who think like we do. It favors caution and the long view. It rewards systems that follow their rules. We want to see how your leadership will fare when pulled into our patterns." Her reply was simple. "Then I will show you how we handle being pulled." The dinner ended with polite handshakes and promises of observation. The next morning, a soft chime woke her in a room that looked out on a narrow garden of unearthly plants. She dressed, washed her hands, and walked to the field as she had walked through all of the rooms since her arrival, calm, curious, and unforced. She did not rush. She did not imagine triumph. She thought instead of questions, she would ask the simulation. She had learned that the best answers often started as good questions. At the entrance to the field, Rel and several senior members of the council stood waiting. The field looked like a wide plain under an unseen sky. Projections rose from the ground in careful arcs, and machines whispered as if they were rehearsing for a performance. There was a seat at the center for a representative of each visiting world. The chair for the human delegation was small but comfortable. Alara sat and felt the weight of many eyes. She did not flinch. Rel spoke in the formal cadence of a judge. We designed this test to measure adaptation within a particular logic. It rewards stable systems and the careful correction of error. We will watch how your delegation chooses. We expect decisions that match our long models. Alara looked toward the horizon of the field. Then we will play, she said. Her voice was quiet, but the small firmness of it made a soft sound in the room. She had no plan to match the council's models. She did have a plan to listen, to watch, and to move when a new pattern revealed itself. And under that plan, she carried the human practice of immediate repair. When something failed, you fixed a part. When the whole system shifted, you did not wait to ask permission to act. Rel inclined his head. We shall see, Princess Alara of Earth. She found his words oddly kind. They were polite and sharp at once. As the machines hummed and prepared the simulation, she felt the small spark of excitement. She did not expect to win by their rules. She had learned to expect the unexpected. The field began, and the council watched. Somewhere beyond the projection screens, the galaxy went on in its slow, patient orbit. Inside the spire, a human princess sat and breathed, and the first quiet moves of a larger game took place without the sound of thunder. The field stretched wide under the pale projection sky, each ripple of light showing the contours of a planet that was neither Earth nor fully. Aliens. Alara sat in her chair, feeling the hum of the machinery beneath her. The council members had gone silent now, their focus on her every move. Rel's many eyes shifted constantly, observing, measuring, waiting for a misstep. The simulation had begun with a series of small tasks. Communities on the projected planet were facing shortages of water, shifts in climate, and sudden changes in terrain. The alien delegates responded with rigid commands, sending robotic harvesters to predicted problem zones and instructing synthetic transport fleets to deliver supplies according to algorithms designed to optimize efficiency. Everything was clean, precise, and predictable. Alara watched the projections, noticing a pattern the machines had not accounted for. The rivers, drawn by algorithm, were simulated to behave like ribbons of water that obeyed simple logic. But she saw that the terrain had subtle variations that would shift the flow in ways the system could not predict. She tapped her console, creating small diversions and barriers to redirect minor streams. Not dramatic, not flashy. Just slight adjustments that would change outcomes later in the simulation. The alien observers frowned. They had not expected this. Their commands were all based on data. They could calculate supply needs, population movement, and climate response. They could not anticipate the effect of intuition applied across a live system. Princess? A soft voice came from her assistant, a human engineer named Soren who had accompanied her. The water redirection will work, but we might need more for the settlements upstream. Alara nodded. Watch carefully, she said. The system assumes a single linear effect. It will take time before it adapts to a ripple. Small ripples became visible in the projections. The water moved differently than the simulations had predicted, and slowly, the settlements that would have flooded or dried up adjusted to the new flow. The algorithm began to overcompensate elsewhere, sending excess resources to regions that no longer needed them. The alien teams started to intervene, adjusting their commands, but Alara had already anticipated this. She quietly adjusted the energy grids controlling transport routes, ensuring that the overcorrection was diverted harmlessly to new problem zones. The projection landscape stabilized in a way that no algorithm had predicted. Her human team worked seamlessly without explicit orders. They had learned to watch, to move, and to respond to her quiet signals. Alara did not shout commands. She did not impose rigid plans. Instead, she watched the system, watched the projections, and guided the humans to act where intuition was required. The aliens began to murmur among themselves. Their leaders had expected a straightforward failure. A human delegation had never been entrusted with such complex simulations before. The idea that they could maintain stability without following established algorithms was almost unthinkable. Why are they acting like this? One of the alien delegates asked, voice tinged with disbelief. "They are unpredictable," said another, "and yet effective." Alara noticed a pattern forming in the energy flows. Certain nodes in the power network were under stress, predicting overload. Instead of sending resources to shore them up, she chose a different approach. She redistributed small amounts to peripheral nodes, allowing minor fluctuations to occur, which in turn stabilized the system naturally. The result was that the central nodes remained secure, and the overall network adapted without the need for drastic intervention. Soren leaned close and whispered, "I've never seen anyone do that. Even our simulations wouldn't think of it." Alara smiled faintly. "Humans think in steps others cannot measure. Sometimes the best fix is to let the system breathe, to respond to its own impulses rather than forcing it." By mid-simulation, the alien delegates were visibly tense. They had relied on control, on prediction, on rigid execution. Alara relied on observation, adaptation, and anticipation. Their robotic fleets were now making corrections that were no longer needed, while the humans worked quietly to stabilize the system without commanding unnecessary movement. The contrast was clear, even to the council members who prided themselves on impartiality. A sudden notification appeared on her console. A small population cluster on the edge of the map was experiencing a sudden temperature spike. The aliens immediately began deploying cooling drones and recalibrating climate regulators. Alara paused. She could have followed their methods, but she remembered what she had learned on Earth. Small changes in one area could cascade across larger systems if handled with care. She calculated an alternative path, one that would redirect energy from nearby unpopulated zones, gradually lowering the temperature without activating heavy machinery that might destabilize other areas. The effect was subtle, almost invisible at first. The temperature spike leveled off slowly, and the settlements remained unaffected. Meanwhile, the alien drones continued to operate unnecessarily, consuming energy and creating minor disturbances in other regions. Alara's quiet solution allowed the system to maintain balance without interference. Rel's expression was unreadable. His multiple eyes blinked in a careful rhythm, tracking every move. The other council members leaned forward, whispering among themselves. Some seemed intrigued, others perplexed. Humans had rarely impressed them in such a comprehensive way. Alara was not trying to dominate or win for the sake of recognition. She was simply guiding the system as it needed to be guided, a style unfamiliar to the aliens. Hours passed, and the simulation grew more complex. Terrain began to shift, weather patterns changed unexpectedly, and resource levels fluctuated in ways that challenged every algorithm in the system. The alien teams grew anxious, issuing new commands, rerouting fleets, and adjusting allocations. Alara, however, continued with quiet observation. She allowed certain minor errors to manifest, knowing that the system's natural feedback would correct them if handled gently. Her human team executed her adjustments with precise coordination, each move small but cumulative. As the simulation neared its climax, a new challenge emerged. A series of landslides threatened to cut off multiple settlements simultaneously. The alien teams reacted with urgency, deploying drones and robotic stabilizers in a methodical pattern designed to control the damage. Alara studied the projections. The alien methods were logical, but they would create bottlenecks that could leave some areas without support. She activated a new plan, coordinating her human team to create micro-diversions, reinforcing the terrain at key points while allowing small landslides in less critical zones to release pressure safely. The effect was immediate and elegant. The major settlements remained secure, and the landslides moved harmlessly into low-population areas. The aliens paused, recognizing the result but unsure how it had been achieved. Their simulations had not accounted for the combination of small, distributed interventions that Alara had implemented. A ripple of quiet admiration spread among the human observers in the chamber. They had always known that humans could adapt in ways machines and rigid algorithms could not predict. Now, the alien council was beginning to understand it as well. Alara glanced at Rel. His expression was still composed, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of surprise. "They are doing well," he said to the council. "Perhaps more well than we expected." Alara allowed herself a small smile. She did not need to prove herself with words. The results spoke loudly enough. The human team had maintained stability, adapted to sudden changes, and solved problems without drawing attention to their interventions. They had not followed the alien rules. They had found their own. By the end of the simulation day, the field was stable. All major threats had been neutralized without destruction. Resources were distributed efficiently, energy flows were balanced, and the populations in the simulation were thriving. The Alien Council leaned back, their murmurs quiet but intense. They had seen many delegations fail, struggle, or require constant guidance. Humans had succeeded with minimal interference, relying on observation, adaptation, and intuition. Alara stood and walked toward the exit. She felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, not triumph. She had not outshone anyone through power or speed. She had acted as humans did, by watching, learning, and making small, thoughtful adjustments that compounded into success. Miko, the young researcher who had guided her through the spire, met her at the doorway. "I do not understand fully how you did it," he admitted. "Even the projections themselves could not predict your decisions." Alara shook her head gently. "It is not about prediction," she said. "It is about attention. Humans notice patterns, small and large, that others may overlook. We respond and we adapt. That is our advantage." Soren stepped forward as well. "They will talk about this, won't they?" "Of course," Alara replied, "but let them talk. What matters is that we have shown them a different way." The council chamber was quiet as she left. The simulation had ended, but the impact would last far longer than the field itself. Aliens who had once dismissed humans as simple or slow to change were now forced to reconsider. They had watched a princess guide her people through a complex test without dominating the process or relying on brute force. They had seen that humans could solve problems in ways that were subtle, creative, and ultimately effective. Rel met her at the hall beyond the field. "You have done well, princess," he said, his voice neutral but carrying a hint of respect. "Perhaps more than we expected." Alara inclined her head. "I hope this is only the beginning," he nodded. "Indeed, the next part of the council's evaluation will be more challenging, but for now you have earned attention." As she walked back to her quarters, Alara allowed herself a moment to reflect. The aliens had underestimated her people, and underestimated the value of quiet ingenuity. She did not need to boast. She only needed to act, as humans always did. Observation, patience, and small but decisive steps could change outcomes more than power or prestige ever could. That night, as she looked out at the faint stars beyond the spire, she thought about the coming challenges. The field had been a first test, a way to measure capacity. The real challenges would be more complex, more unpredictable, yet she felt ready. She had seen how humans could navigate uncertainty, adapt to rapid change, and make choices that machines and tradition might never predict. And so the human princess prepared. Not with grand gestures or sweeping proclamations, but with careful attention, steady observation, and the quiet certainty that humanity had something the galaxy had not yet fully understood: the ability to act thoughtfully and adaptively in a world that did not follow simple rules. The field had been stabilized, but the lessons it offered were only beginning to unfold. Alara knew the aliens would watch her closely from now on, expecting patterns, expecting mistakes. They would not understand that the strength of humans lay not in predictability or rigid control, but in the subtle power of observation, adaptation, and careful intervention. As the lights dimmed in her quarters, she closed her eyes. Tomorrow, the simulation would continue, the challenges would grow, and the aliens would continue to test her. But she was ready. And when the next ripple came, she would guide it quietly, decisively, and with all the patience humans could offer. The first day of the field had ended. The aliens had learned something they did not expect. And in that quiet, Alara smiled, knowing the true test was only beginning. The second day of the field opened with a pale light washing over the projection of the planet. Where yesterday had tested basic resource allocation and environmental balance, today's simulation introduced layers of uncertainty. Winds shifted unpredictably, rivers changed their course midstream, and settlement clusters began to move. The alien delegates' algorithms faltered at these dynamic changes, and even their robotic fleets could not predict every outcome. Alara observed silently, noting each subtle fluctuation, each ripple in the simulated world. Soren leaned close, his voice low. "This is different." Yesterday's lessons helped, but these changes are chaotic. Even small errors can cascade quickly. Alara nodded. That is the point. Humans respond to chaos differently. We do not rely solely on predictions. We notice, we adapt, and we act where needed. Watch. The first challenge of the day appeared as a sudden flood in a lowland settlement. Water levels were rising faster than the simulations had indicated. The aliens immediately deployed their drones in a linear pattern, pushing the water back and diverting it to artificial channels. The approach was precise, controlled, and predictable. Alara watched the effect for a few moments. She saw that their channels would divert the water, but cause unexpected strain on adjacent settlements upstream, potentially displacing populations in ways the algorithms could not anticipate. Instead of matching the aliens' rigid approach, Alara instructed her human team to work on several micro-solutions simultaneously. They reinforced natural barriers along the edges of the lowland, dug small diversion trenches in less critical areas, and coordinated with mobile energy nodes to pump water gently into areas designed to absorb overflow. None of the actions were drastic. None drew attention. Yet together they allowed the floodwaters to stabilize naturally, protecting both the original settlement and the neighboring clusters. The alien observers paused, blinking in surprise. Their systems had not predicted this. The algorithms' calculations assumed only linear adjustments. Alara's interventions created a network of small corrections that the simulations could not fully measure. "Remarkable," whispered one delegate to another. "They anticipate outcomes without forcing them." Alara's smile was quiet. She did not need praise. The outcome was already clear. The human team had prevented disaster through careful observation and subtle action. This was not about winning. It was about seeing and responding. Next came the challenge of resource scarcity. Certain settlements had suddenly used more energy than expected, and food stocks were diminishing at an alarming rate. Alien fleets moved methodically, rerouting deliveries and recalibrating allocations. They focused on areas that the simulation highlighted as critical, leaving smaller settlements vulnerable. Alara studied the map. She noticed that some underutilized regions had access to natural resources that could be harnessed quickly if redirected with care. She directed her team to activate adaptive resource channels, allowing excess energy from low-demand areas to flow into high-demand settlements. At the same time, they coordinated minor adjustments in local agriculture, using simulated drones to distribute seed and water where it would have the greatest stabilizing effect. The result was subtle but effective. No settlement suffered shortages. Resources were balanced across the system without the need for disruptive interventions. The alien delegates, who had relied on rigid allocation rules, could only watch as the human team maintained stability with minimal disruption. Rel observed silently, his expression carefully neutral. Behind his composed demeanor there was a flicker of curiosity. Humans did not act like other species he had overseen. Their solutions were not obvious, but they were remarkably effective. During a brief pause in the simulation, Alara walked along the edge of the field. The projections stretched endlessly, shifting with invisible winds and tides. She touched the console lightly, feeling the hum of energy beneath her fingertips. Humans had a gift for seeing possibilities in patterns others dismissed. The alien delegates had the data, but they lacked the intuition, the ability to respond fluidly when the system presented new challenges. A sudden shift in the simulation brought a series of small earthquakes along a ridge. Alien teams immediately attempted to stabilize the terrain using large-scale mechanical interventions. Alara studied the movement carefully. The machines would stabilize some areas, but cause unintended collapses in nearby zones. Instead, she directed her team to create minor controlled diversions, reinforcing vulnerable points while allowing non-critical areas to shift naturally. The earthquakes were absorbed without damage to settlements or critical infrastructure. "Why do they act like this?" asked a young alien delegate turning to Rel. "They do not follow the protocols. They follow a different kind of logic," Rel replied. "One that our systems cannot fully predict." Alara watched the alien fleets continue to move unnecessarily, consuming energy and creating minor disruptions. She made a quiet note of each movement, guiding her team to anticipate and counter the effects before they escalated. By midday, the pattern was clear. Humans could maintain balance and stability without relying on brute control, simply by observing, anticipating, and adjusting with care. The final challenge of the day tested coordination across the entire simulation. Settlements needed simultaneous resource deliveries, environmental adjustments, and population movement to survive a projected storm system. Alien teams worked in linear sequences, issuing commands that the simulations tracked closely. Delays and bottlenecks began to appear. The system wavered under the weight of multiple dependent tasks. Alara remained calm. She observed each projection, noting the dependencies and the potential ripple effects. She did not give long instructions. Instead, she broke the challenge into small segments and allowed her human team to act independently within each segment, using observation and judgment to adjust in real time. Microcorrections in energy flow, water management, and transportation created a self-balancing effect. The storm arrived, and yet the settlements remained secure, resources steady, and populations safe. The alien delegates were silent. Their algorithms had failed to predict the success of these small, distributed actions. Their systems assumed centralized control and linear solutions. The humans had achieved balance without enforcing rigid hierarchies. Rel finally spoke, his tone measured. "This is unexpected. They are not following our rules, and yet the results surpass our expectations." Alara nodded slightly. "Rules are not always the answer," she said softly. "Sometimes the world requires attention, adjustment, and patience." The council observed the results with growing fascination. For centuries, they had relied on structured procedures and predictive models to maintain control and stability. Humans, they realized, brought something entirely different. Creativity applied quietly, observation paired with action, and the ability to adapt to unexpected changes. As the simulation concluded, the field remained stable. Populations were unharmed, resources balanced, and terrain intact. The alien delegates recorded data, adjusting their notes to account for outcomes that their systems could not explain. Humans had not only survived the simulation, they had demonstrated a new paradigm for problem-solving. Soren turned to Alara, eyes wide. "They won't forget this. Even if they try, they won't understand fully how it happened." Alara smiled. "They do not need to understand fully. They only need to see that it worked. That is enough for now." The council chamber outside the field was unusually quiet. Delegates whispered in low tones, exchanging theories and predictions. The simulation had tested more than resource management and adaptation. It had tested perception, judgment, and the subtle power of observation. Humans had excelled in all three. Rel approached Alara as she prepared to leave. "You continue to surprise," he said. "The council expected a straightforward failure. Instead, you have demonstrated capability beyond what we measured." Alara inclined her head, keeping her expression composed. "Humans are used to acting when the outcome is uncertain," she said. "We rely on attention, on noticing what others miss, and on small, thoughtful action. That is what you see here." Rel's eyes flickered, almost as if he were reassessing everything he thought he knew about her people. "It appears there is much we underestimated," he admitted. Alara's gaze did not waver. "Perhaps, but underestimation can be corrected through observation and understanding, not through force." The day ended with a sense of quiet accomplishment. The human delegation had not only met the simulation's challenges, they had redefined the expectations. Alien teams left the field pondering the subtle methods they had witnessed, and humans returned to their quarters with a sense of measured confidence. Later, in a small observation room overlooking the simulated planet, Alara and Soren reviewed the outcomes. Graphs and data streams flickered across screens, showing the success of human-led adjustments. Each small intervention had contributed to overall stability, and each had done so without overt control or disruption. Soren shook his head in awe. "It's incredible. They'll never predict this in advance." Alara's eyes rested on the shifting projections. "Humans excel when the path is uncertain. We see opportunities in chaos. We do not need brute force or rigid algorithms to succeed. Observation, care, and thoughtful action are enough." The next day promised even greater challenges. The council had indicated that the field would increase complexity and unpredictability, testing the limits of her delegation's abilities. Alara welcomed it. Each new challenge was an opportunity to show how human ingenuity worked in harmony with systems that others considered too unpredictable. As she prepared for the next stage, she felt a sense of calm determination. Humans had proven that they could maintain stability under pressure, adapt to changing circumstances, and succeed without domination or rigid enforcement. That quiet capability was now on full display, and the alien delegates could not ignore it. Alara knew that the Council would watch closely from now on, expecting errors, expecting chaos, and expecting failure. But she also knew that humans thrived in situations others found unpredictable. Observation, adaptation, and subtle action were tools the aliens had not measured, and perhaps could not. The second day of the field had ended, but its lessons were only beginning. Alara's quiet guidance had shown that success did not require force or spectacle. It required attention, care, and the patient understanding of systems both complex and alive. And as the pale projection light dimmed, Alara allowed herself a brief smile. Humans had not only survived the simulation, they had begun to teach a lesson the aliens would remember. The true power of humanity lay not in dominance, but in the quiet strength of observation, adaptation, and thoughtful action. Tomorrow, the challenges would grow. But so would the proof that humans could rise where others could not. The third day had prepared the Council for what they thought would be a decisive test, but the fourth day of the field brought something they had never experienced, an open-ended challenge that had no fixed solution, only evolving circumstances. The projections stretched infinitely, showing a world in motion, with climate shifts, population migrations, and energy fluctuations occurring simultaneously. Alien delegates observed with tense anticipation, ready to intervene with their sophisticated algorithms, expecting mistakes, delays, or chaos from the human team. Alara arrived at the field's central chamber before dawn, her posture calm, her expression neutral. She did not rush or show signs of stress. The human team had already begun preliminary scans of the system, noting subtle variations that yesterday's interventions had created. Energy flows were now slightly altered from their original state. Rivers had shifted course in small but meaningful ways, and settlements had adapted organically to the previous day's interventions. It was a complex web, delicate yet resilient, a system alive with feedback loops that only a keen observer could understand. Soren stood beside her, scanning the projections. "The complexity today is unlike anything we've seen," he said softly. "The algorithms are struggling to keep up. The aliens will expect us to fail." Alara's eyes scanned the horizon of the simulation. "Expectations are not reality," she replied. "We act according to observation. Let them expect what they will. Our task is to respond, adapt, and guide." The first challenge arrived suddenly. A massive storm system developed over a central cluster of settlements, threatening to disrupt energy lines, water supply, and transportation networks. Alien teams immediately began deploying their fleets, creating a rigid network of interventions designed to contain the storm and protect infrastructure. Alara watched quietly. She noted that their method was structured, predictable, and inflexible. It could work if the storm followed expectations, but it would fail if even a small variable shifted unexpectedly. Instead of matching their approach, she activated distributed interventions. The human team placed adaptive energy nodes along critical lines, not to control the storm, but to absorb its impact and allow minor variations to pass safely. Water management systems were adjusted to create buffers, temporarily storing excess flow in natural reservoirs, while mobile transport units prepared alternate routes for displaced populations. No single action was drastic. Together, they formed a network that could adjust naturally to the storm's unpredictable movements. The storm moved unpredictably, bending and swirling in ways the simulations had not accounted for. Alien delegations grew tense, recalculating constantly, issuing commands that quickly became obsolete. Meanwhile, the human team acted intuitively, responding to immediate conditions rather than predicted outcomes. The settlements remained intact, energy flows stable, and populations safe. Rel's many eyes observed carefully, noting each human intervention. "They are not commanding the system," he said quietly to a fellow counselor. "They are listening to it." Alara's focus shifted as the storm passed through the region. She observed minor disturbances in peripheral zones, small landslides and shifts in terrain that were not threatening but could cascade into larger problems if ignored. Without drawing attention, she guided her team to make subtle adjustments. Small barriers were reinforced, energy flows redistributed, and transportation nodes repositioned. These interventions were almost invisible, yet they stabilized the system completely. Throughout the simulation, she emphasized observation over action. She watched patterns form, anticipating outcomes rather than forcing solutions. Her human team acted like extensions of her attention, responding to subtle signals and adjusting interventions in real time. The result was not chaos but harmony, a system guided with care rather than control. Midday brought a new challenge. A series of resource shortages emerged across distant settlements. Food supplies in one region were depleting faster than expected, energy lines in another were overloaded, and water reserves in a third were falling below safe levels. Alien teams immediately attempted to optimize allocations through centralized command. Commands were issued in rapid succession, systems redirected, and transport fleets rerouted. Yet their linear approach caused bottlenecks and inefficiencies. Alara did not panic. She analyzed the entire network, noting underutilized resources that could be mobilized without creating disruption. She coordinated multiple teams to redistribute energy, water, and food through decentralized channels, creating a balance that the algorithms could not anticipate. Small interventions in local regions had cascading effects that stabilized the larger system. Settlements that had seemed vulnerable now thrived without dramatic action. Soren whispered, "They'll never understand this. Their algorithms assume a rigid path." "We're proving that observation and adaptation are stronger than prediction alone." Ilara nodded. "Let them try to understand. The result is what matters," the council observed in stunned silence. For decades, they had relied on data, prediction, and structured algorithms to maintain control over complex systems. Humans, they realized, succeeded not through brute control, but through subtle interaction, careful observation, and adaptive decision-making. Each small choice compounded into a stable, resilient network that surpassed expectations. As the day progressed, more unpredictable events unfolded. Sudden migration of population clusters, unexpected changes in terrain, minor energy fluctuations, and environmental shifts that challenged the system's stability. Alien teams attempted to intervene, recalculating constantly, but their interventions often caused new problems. Humans responded differently. They noticed the changes, predicted potential consequences, and acted with precise, gentle adjustments. No intervention was unnecessary, no action was forced. Ilara watched as the system gradually aligned with their interventions. Settlements stabilized, resources balanced, and the environment maintained its integrity. Each adjustment was subtle, invisible to casual observers, yet it created a cumulative effect that restored equilibrium to the entire planet. A minor crisis appeared near a mountainous region. Rockslides threatened to block energy distribution networks and isolate several settlements. Alien fleets immediately moved to stabilize the terrain mechanically. Ilara paused, observing the situation. Their method would prevent the slides, but would divert energy in ways that could destabilize other areas. She directed the human team to reinforce natural barriers and allow minor, harmless slides to release pressure. The outcome was smooth, with no settlements affected and minimal energy diversion. The alien delegates exchanged confused glances. Their models had not accounted for distributed adaptive interventions. Humans had succeeded by anticipating consequences, allowing the system to correct itself, and making small adjustments that were often invisible. Rel finally spoke aloud, his tone careful but carrying an edge of respect. "It seems that their methods cannot be predicted or fully measured, and yet the results are undeniable." Ilara did not respond. She did not need to. The outcome spoke louder than words. Humans had achieved stability where algorithms faltered, had guided the system with care rather than control, and had preserved every settlement and resource without overt intervention. The simulation entered its final phase. A complex storm system merged with resource fluctuations and population movements across multiple regions simultaneously. Alien algorithms scrambled to issue commands, But each order quickly became outdated as conditions shifted. Humans, guided by observation and understanding, acted fluidly. Energy nodes were redirected, water buffers adjusted, transportation networks rerouted, all without a single command conflicting with another. The result was remarkable. The planet stabilized naturally, all populations remained safe, resources balanced, and environmental systems intact. The aliens could not explain how the humans had achieved this. Their models predicted failure, inefficiency, and chaos, but none occurred. Alara rose from her chair and looked at the council. She did not boast. She did not gesture dramatically. She only spoke quietly, clearly. Humans succeed not by following strict rules or controlling every variable. We succeed by observing carefully, adapting thoughtfully, and acting with awareness. We notice what others overlook, and we respond in ways that maintain balance without force. A hush fell over the chamber. The council members, who had spent centuries relying on prediction and structure, were forced to reconsider their assumptions. Humans were not primitive or limited. Humans were capable of subtlety, of intuition, and of solutions that machines and rigid systems could not replicate. Rel stepped forward. "It is clear," he said slowly, "that humanity operates differently than we anticipated. Not worse, not less capable, but different. Their methods are effective in ways we cannot fully predict." Alara inclined her head. "Difference does not imply weakness. It can be a strength if understood and respected." For the first time, the council members felt a mixture of humility and fascination. They had observed countless delegations, measured countless species, and relied on algorithms that had rarely failed. Humans had succeeded where others would have faltered, not through power, speed, or brute force, but through patience, observation, and adaptation. The simulations ended. The projections dimmed, and the field returned to its neutral state. Humans had maintained stability throughout, solved problems the algorithms could not predict, and demonstrated resilience under unpredictable conditions. The alien delegates recorded the outcomes, their expressions ranging from awe to careful curiosity. Outside the field, Alara walked with her human team. Soren spoke first, breaking the silence. "They won't understand fully. Their algorithms will never predict this. But they will respect it," Alara nodded. "Respect is enough. Understanding can come later." Rel approached her, his demeanor formal but carrying a subtle shift in tone. "Princess Alara, you have demonstrated capabilities we did not anticipate. The Council recognizes that humans possess qualities not fully measurable by our simulations. Creativity, adaptation, observation, these are strengths." Alara kept her voice steady. "Humans have always relied on what we can observe and understand, combined with quick, thoughtful action. We do not need perfection to succeed. We need awareness, adaptability, and care." Rel inclined his head. "It appears that the Council underestimated humanity. That error is now corrected." Alara allowed herself a small, quiet smile. She did not gloat. She did not need to. The field had spoken. Humans had proven that they could act decisively and effectively in circumstances others found chaotic, unpredictable, or unmanageable. Their success was subtle, elegant, and undeniable. As the council deliberated, Alara walked along the observation galleries, looking at the projections of a planet now stabilized by human intervention. She reflected on the lessons learned. Small, thoughtful actions could have massive impact. Observation was often more powerful than force, and adaptation could outmatch prediction. These were principles that humans had long understood, often without formal recognition. The alien delegates could only record outcomes, acknowledge results, and begin to reconsider the assumptions they had made about humanity. Alara had not demonstrated superiority through aggression or spectacle. She had shown it through methodical, patient action, an approach that the Council had never fully measured. As she returned to her quarters, she thought of the next steps. The Council might attempt new simulations, more complex challenges, or tests with different variables. Humans could handle them. Observation, adaptation, and thoughtful action were not skills limited to simulations. They were tools for life itself. And the galaxy, vast and unpredictable, would continue to offer tests that humans were uniquely prepared to meet. Alara looked out at the distant stars beyond the spire. Quietly, without fanfare, she allowed herself to feel a sense of accomplishment. Humanity had been underestimated, yes, but the errors of expectation had been corrected. In the calm of the field, in the subtle victories of careful observation, in the quiet balance of systems maintained without force, humans had proven their strength, not through power alone, but through ingenuity, patience, and understanding. The Council had learned that day what humans had always known. The quiet strength of observation, adaptation, and thoughtful action could achieve what others could not. And as the stars outside her window twinkled softly, Alara felt the promise of the future, of humans guiding not with force, but with insight, subtly reshaping challenges into opportunities, quietly, elegantly, and without need for spectacle. The field had ended, but the lesson remained. Humanity was underestimated no longer, and the galaxy would have to take note. They underestimated the human princess, until the battlefield fell quiet,